So this next panel is on the subject of the role of top 10 automobile brands in improving worker safety in their supply chains, helping India improve manufacturing professionalism. As we mentioned earlier, we believe that the automobile sector is the one that has to change the whole manufacturing supply chain professionalism in this country, and it is the need of the hour. To discuss this subject, we have today with us Dr. Harpreet Kaur, who's a business and human rights specialist at the UNDP, Mr. Raghavan Srinivasan, who is a former editor, Business Line, and a senior journalist, Mr. Srihari Palya, senior policy analyst and researcher, India Spent, and Mr. Sunil Arora, Abilities India Pistons and Rings, and he's also on the executive committee of ACMA, the Automotive Component Manufacturers Association. And Sandeep will also be joining us. Dr. Kaur, if I might start with you, maybe you could also give a global perspective to this whole issue that we are debating here. Over to you, ma'am.
Sure. No, thank you, Saroja, and thank you everyone, I think, for a very, very insightful, sort of description. And really thank you workers को सबसे ज़्यादा आप लोगों को बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया और धन्यवाद, because I think हम लोग बहुत ही ऊंचे लेवल और हाई लेवल पे काम करते हैं, जहाँ पे हम बड़ी बड़ी पॉलिसीज की बात करते हैं, बट इतना ज़रूरी है कि आप लोग अपनी ज़ुबानी अपने एक्सपीरियंसेस शेयर करें. और आई थिंक जब आप लोग ये एक्सपीरियंसेस शेयर करते हैं अपनी जुबानी, इससे काफी फर्क पड़ता है, बिकॉज हम लोगों को ये एक्सपीरियंसेस नहीं है, एंड अनफॉर्चुनेटली आप लोगों के साथ ये एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं. सो हम लोग बातें कर सकते हैं, बट आई थिंक जब आप अपना एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करते हैं, जब आई थिंक उस जितनी क्रेडिबिलिटी उससे आती है. सो थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर रियली शेयरिंग योर एक्सपीरियंसेस. I think, Saroja, just in terms of sort of what you said in terms of the global, sort of reflections in terms of, where we are. I was just kind of reflecting on the report that was shared earlier, but really what I was thinking in the context of that the automotive industry, much like any other industry these days, can really not sustain long-term global success while dismissing sort of worker safety and poor working conditions. I think the time is gone. It can't continue like this, what we've been, the situation has been. And where I see is, investing in worker safety and well-being is also not just a moral imperative. It's not just a good thing to do, but there's a strategic business decision, I think, that drives operational efficiency, financial performance, but also just in terms of the long-term sustainability. And maybe I think I'll start by saying the worker safety and well-being is definitely fundamental to productivity, brand reputation, and compliance with global standards. And I think particularly because you had asked me to also focus a little bit on in terms of, connecting with the ESG or the environment, social, and governance criteria. But I think it's become even more critical to focus on this because this is becoming a much more stronger and stricter requirement from many of the global standards, including the new European Union's directive on corporate sustainable due diligence directive, but also in terms of the way that you're seeing import bans and other regulations globally that are taking place. In India, I think with BRSR reporting an increased focus, particularly from the Corporate Affairs Ministry, and also sort of looking at other business players in terms of the ESG criteria, I think this has become a really critical issue. Why it's important? I think because, we know that unsafe conditions lead to sort of higher injuries, absenteeism, turnover, disrupting operational and escalating costs, while also damaging reputation and deterring investors and global partnerships. And this non-compliance with labor law risk fines, lawsuits, and trade barriers. And there have been many cases where we have seen that the businesses have had not just reputational risk, but also operational, financial, legal, and regulatory risk, really further impacting, their competitiveness in the market. So I think this is also very critical, particularly for this industry, because the automotive industry's reliance on skilled workers, I think, makes worker safety really, really essential for maintaining supply chain stability and fostering some strong supplier relationships. So what I'm saying here is, the global success in the automotive industry requires not just innovation in technology and design, but really a robust commitment to the ethical labor practices, and dismissing worker safety, well-being might yield sort of some short-term cost savings, but I think will eventually, or inevitably lead to the operational inefficiencies, again, and financial liabilities. And we have seen over and over, and I'm happy to share some of the other examples, but we've seen that the companies that invest in creating safe, equitable, and inclusive workplaces are more likely to build resilient supply chains. They attract global partnerships and kind of maintain a competitive edge in increasingly, conscientious sort of global market as well. So just to end, this part by saying what I see is that investing in worker safety is a win-win strategy for the industry. And it isn't just an expense, but I think it really is an investment and a very powerful investment in the company's future. So it's the time that, in terms of looking at the regulatory, but also sort of the non-regulatory pressures, it isn't something that the businesses can ignore anymore. Thanks, Saroja. Happy to answer any follow-up
Thank you.
questions that you may have.
Mr. Arora, if I might ask you, what are the steps that you see the industry take, and how are they, playing out in the marketplace right now? And again, going back global as well as, the domestic market, what are the steps that you've been seeing on worker safety? So you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Over almost 4 decades in this industry, I've seen a lot of changes come around, and for the better. Safety is kind of critically paramount. Maruti has 10 pillars where you have to be green. You must be green in all those pillars if you want to get new businesses. And safety is one of those pillars. So, and that is true for all OEMs in India and abroad. So safety is, of course, has been playing out over the years, not so much maybe 20 years ago, but now it's become so critical that you cannot survive in your business if you are. What I heard today is a story that probably plays out in the tier threes or the tier fours of the automotive industry, where unfortunately it's not so much regulated by the tier ones. I think the tier ones go and regulate their tier twos, but the tier twos have to regulate the tier threes and the tier fours, because the automotive industry supply chain runs very deep. You have to understand that. That is a challenge, yes, and these stories that are emanating, that there are, all the things which are not according to labor laws are being told in this forum, which is heartbreaking, but that's the reality. But in my company, for example, we've been growing at a CAGR of about 23% over the last since COVID, and we are still an MSME, but we are a tier one, and we supply 45% of our products to global customers across the globe, whether it's Europe or it's America or it's China or it's Japan. So that is, safety is a paramount consideration. Safety makes business sense. Let me just say that if you are not a safe company, your customers are not going to look at you. They will find out sooner or later. I heard stories that वो audit के time आते हैं, फिर वो ये करते हैं, वो करते हैं. Customers are smart these days. Customers will know if you're a safe company or not. And when they walk through your shop floors, they can make out that this is a safe company or an unsafe company. So it's very clear. I mean, these guys are now trained. They have been through hundreds of companies. They instantly point out an anomaly in safety instantly. So we've been doing ACMA cluster programs for over 20 years now, and the latest one, after all the growth that we've had, we've joined a TPM cluster, which means safety and housekeeping, which we've been doing for 20 years. And I still feel that we have a much more, steps to go forward in. So we initiated this 18-month program specifically for our company, where all our people are going to be trained over and over again in safety and housekeeping. Because and then of course maintenance, so how to maintain your machines and how. It's a basic program. It's based on the Japanese culture of TPM, but that's what we are doing in spite of having aspirations to become $100 million company by 2030. But I told my guys, listen, growth is good, but don't forget your basics. And when you grow, you kind of try and compromise on things. That I've seen a lot happening in so many companies. यहाँ पर ये हो गया. And by the way, unsafe companies vanish into thin air. By the way, आग लग जाएगी या कुछ हो जाएगा, they just go away. So safety is absolutely paramount, and I think it makes great business sense. And I would only urge my colleagues, if there are any people here on this Zoom call, and I think we train our tier twos, but whether they train their tier threes, I think that chain has to now go forward, because Maruti has been insisting train your tier twos, so we've been doing that. But whether they've been doing that to their tier threes, I have a lot of doubt on that. And that's where all these very sorry stories emanate from.
Thank you, Mr. Arora. Mr. Raghavan, if I might come to you, uh, what does your perception of how the top brands are moving on this subject of worker safety, and what can really push them and the rest of us to actually make this change on the ground?
I think eventually it comes down to actually market economics,
Business.
because, you know, companies are driven first, last, and foremost by the need to be efficient, to maximize margins, and so on. But what is often not realized, particularly by uh, many of the smaller players, is that safety and efficiency in production go hand in hand. So when there is an accident, there is a worker who gets injured, but also a machine which gets damaged. In fact, I heard in the workers' voices presentation, quite often they say, machine ki zyada izzat hai, worker ki nahi hai. But the reverse also I've heard from this thing, that look, this one single machine cost me 12 crores, but these guys treat it like, some random this thing, so they don't take care of it properly. No matter what training we give, they damage it, and that costs me much more. So I think, this realization has to be broadcast, through because production processes, which are designed, and that engineers don't design processes and machines for people to get hurt, right? I mean, by and large, when a piece of equipment is designed or a production process is designed, the people who do that take into account, the possibility of injuries and work precautions into that. Injuries happen or accidents happen because these are either not implemented or ignored or bypassed or given up somewhere along the way, as various things break down or repairs happen or whatever. So I think this realization, this education has to happen amongst the manufacturers, and the big companies have to take the lead. But, I think it was the CIA which came up with the concept of plausible deniability. So you do something which is really, the state can't take ownership of. So you do it, but you allow the person at the top, say the president, to deny with absolute honesty that he had no knowledge of such a thing by simply not telling them. So, but it's a corporate sector which has sort of embraced plausible deniability. So when you talk about tier one, tier two, tier three, tier four, what does it mean? Right? Ms. Arora said customers are smart. Yes, they are. So are the big companies. The big 10 are smart. They know exactly what is happening down the value chain. They choose not to pursue it beyond a point, right? That must change. They must be held accountable. And that, I think that kind of pressure has to come from the marketplace, from this thing. And particularly now that the Indian automobile sector is not wholly domestic centric and it is a reasonably large exporter, because in India what is happening is that we have the rules, we have the regulations, but everybody looks on it, so even the government, the government's intentions are fine, right? And that's why these laws and regulations exist. But what happens at the execution level? The execution level, every regulation is simply seen as an opportunity for rent seeking, first and foremost. And if that's not possible, then the regulation is, attempted. You talk to any factory owner, will say that, look, I mean, whenever there is a decision, these guys only go looking around so that they can extract money from me. They're not there to they're not looking at it from the point of view of safety of the worker or whatever. So I think, you need to work on all the stakeholders. So you the big 10 companies, they really have to take ownership of the whole chain, and not just what they say they are in control of it. The rest I don't know. There was a very telling comment by the workers again, and that's, I think, something which needs to be hammered in here, which is that मैंने देखा नहीं, मैंने सुना नहीं, मैंने पूछा नहीं. What does not happen directly within my control, I'm not responsible for. I don't know about it. I don't need to do anything about it. That needs to be changed. And that can, I think, only happen because in the West, a lot of this changed because of investor pressure. You had big stakeholders, large investors who sort of feel in India, the ownership structure is very different, right? So we have majority promoter ownership, or in the case of foreign companies, it is sort of majority owned by the foreign owner, and there are retail shareholders, but they're too diffuse and they don't come together on such issues. And we don't have any strong institutional investor who's able to leverage some kind of action on this, right? So investor pressure is ruled out. I think social pressure, activism, publicity with the consumers market. Again, in your film, which was shown at the start uh, of this meeting, uh, there was a lady I saw who mentioned that, you know, as a car owner, as a driver, you know, do I know whether my vehicle has been, made with lost limbs and fingers? I don't know. And I think that's a very important, statement to take note of. How can we build that awareness that, that there has to be some kind of that, because that's the only pressure which is going to work. Uh, so, two or three things. I think the big companies have to work with their total supply chain and take ownership of the whole supply chain, and also educate them on the fact that, efficiency is linked to safety, is linked to this thing. So when you do a production process right, you reduce the risk of accidents. And when you do it right, when you're doing it the way it was designed to, you're producing at maximum efficiency. It's in your interest to do it, right? The second is, I think, in the sort of kind of purchase agreements, I think, when you do an audit, these are the kind of things that these questions need to be asked. Because multiple workers have said that, if we get unreasonable targets, and that's when all the safety speed breakers are taken out and we just forced to produce, and accidents happen, injuries happen, deaths happen. So, but why are those targets happening? Because some order has been placed. I think there has to be a process which catches this and say, how can you reasonably expect whatever 1 million steering columns to be made within such a limited time frame? Right? But still you demand that you do it. So you know that what the consequence of that is going to be. So these kind of questions, these kind of detail, this thing, that also needs to be done. And I think, we also need to sort of, work with the government, and really clean up the sort of regulatory implementation, supervisory side of this. It's not that we don't have the laws or the regulations and not being implemented. And again, I don't think that, at the top, it's, everything is seen as an opportunity to collect rent, so there are people who are sincerely committed to this, but how does that get translated into an effective message at the operational level? Ki, your first responsibility is to, ensure this, that kind of thing. So I think a sort of three-pronged approach, multi-pronged approach is the only way that we can sort of improve this thing, because believe me, the industry is very well aware of the kind of statistics that you're putting out, right? But nobody will, in their official report, they will not use the numbers you put out. They will use the numbers put out by the state government or the industry department. Why? Because it suits them much better. And obviously, there is a huge underreporting happening out there. So these are things, which you need to chip away at all these things for there to be a sort of collective improvement in the status on the ground. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Palya, you've been covering this space independently for a few years now. What are the changes you've seen on the ground, and what do you believe will bring, from your angle, what is the tipping point that will bring some change to, make us all feel more comfortable than we are today?
Thanks, Roja. Yeah, much of my inputs are focused based on the reporting that I've done last couple of years, limited reporting. But based on the data that I have had and based on the conversations, many of them already participants in this group, including Manjeet ji and Suchita ji and all that. I mean, we see that there is only very limited improvement. The problem with injuries that we see in the auto sector, I mean, I believe that there is a fundamental problem in terms of how the entire system is getting mapped. Beyond the tier one, I don't think there is any kind of visibility many of the OEMs have. But the problem is this is only backed by, I mean, in terms of data, like Srini was saying, in terms of data, what is available with us is probably DG Firstly data that you sort of highlighted, which is bare, which is just bare minimum. It's probably not collating all the data in terms of all the injuries data, fatality data that are available in this entire sector or in other registered factories, non-registered factories. So the problem that I see is that organizations like SII have to come in and sort of plug that space. And when that doesn't get taken seriously by the government, that becomes a problem in terms of accountability and visibility. But the important part is that with the reporting itself, when I went out in July and spoke to quite a lot of women workers, the fact is that they are seeing, some sort of, they're relying on SIA's services and coming forward in terms of looking at what kind of support is available, and they're becoming aware. The numbers itself show that, there are more women coming in, there are more workers coming in to sort of avail these services, and they're also identifying the problems. What the workers did today in terms of mapping, in terms of participatory research, that is something I believe that needs to be done by OEMs and their supply chain, if that is possible. I mean, when I spoke to experts, the larger problem is that, the supply chain itself is so widespread geographically. Is it possible for them to sort of identify the problems? Even if they're identifying the problems, are they taking the initiative to sort of move forward? In terms of some other sectors, for example, I had gone to Surat, where there are similar issues in the power loom sector. You have similar accidents. Probably the context is different, but the fact is that these places also don't report accidents, and the supply chain is not as deep as the auto sector. So it's largely seeming that the problem is that it's an epidemic, but nobody wants to sort of identify it publicly. Somewhere, disparately, there's no convergence between what's, let's say, ESIC has some data that talks about disabilities and accidents. DG Firstly has some information, SI has some information, but none of this is coming together. So for me, from my perspective, I think there are three issues, three aspects that need to be sort of considered. One is there a vent for workers, even within their shop floors, even the establishment, to sort of raise a complaint and that being heard at a proper platform without some kind of reprisal on them. How well is the entire auto sector sort of mapping these tier 3, tier 4 organizations, which is far more widespread, without that issue of, it being pushed to the fringes, this informality sort of being pushed to the fringes. And finally, like I said, the government also needs to intervene at some point, because right now, with SIS data itself, which is terrific data, it's largely limited to the work in Maharashtra and Haryana, and that too in limited locations. This to be done at scale and for some kind of serious intervention, only I think behemoth like the state governments or the union governments can sort of. So that is something that needs to be considered in terms of bringing everything together. All stakeholders need to be heard. Yes.
Just had a comment, which kind of runs through what all of you said. Global organizations map their global supply chain. And yet in India, we say that, within India, we can't map the second tier or the third tier. It kind of doesn't sit well, right? I mean, there's something more that we need to do clearly on this.
What happens is, Saroja, that in the advanced countries, Germany, the Mittelstand is a 50 million euro company, and that's their small company, 50 million euros. In India, you have companies which are not even 50 crores who are in the supply chain, with 30 crores, 20 crores. That is the critical difference. And these are the guys who use these presses which are unsafe. Instead of using a very good press which costs a lot more money, they're using these presses from in Ludhiana or Rajkot, and they're getting away with it. There has to be, as you rightly said, that the OEMs need to kind of define that if any product is made from such an unsafe equipment, and probably Sandeep can, put this through to all the big 10 companies, draw a list of the things that your, selected audience has, your audience has told us today. These machines should not be in the supply chain, period. And it will find the light of the day. ACMA will support it. We don't want people to get hurt. So we need to start, and we need to start now. And by the way, from 4 million cars, we are talking of 9 to 10 million cars by the turn of the decade. What we did in 40 years is going to happen in the next 7-8 years because of the aspirations of the people. There's going to be so many more production units, so many more accidents. The time to do it is now. And make a list, get it banned. And if anybody is found using such a machine down the supply chain, you're out. You have to be strict. There is no other way in a democracy. In China, I used to go there 25 years ago, I still do. They had similar problems. And then they, it's not a democracy. They just put a diktat out there. These machines are out, and they're out. And then the Chinese have state support, by the way. They get, you walk into a factory which is the size of a football. They've got machines lying there which are unused, all paid for by the state. So that's a different story. But here we need to kind of start doing some sort of punitive measures for companies to and it's not difficult, Sandeep. If you try and raise this list, circulate it, we'll make sure that everybody in the, at least in the north, all these big companies, they will call ACMA, and then we'll say we support it, and then we'll take the ACMA president there. So it can happen. If you like, this can happen.
That's very encouraging to hear. Any other comments before?
Sorry, Saroja. I mean, if I
Yeah.
could just add, I couldn't agree, more with Mr. Sunil in terms of, what they're saying in terms of sort of looking at the advanced economies. But I just also do want to highlight that these are also the countries, we're kind of taking example of Germany, but these are also the countries where unions play a critical role in protecting workers' rights. So, the role of unions and collectivization, which I know is not the primary and focus area of Safe in India, but I think, we're talking about countries where unions are really integral to sort of the co-determination systems, where workers participate in management decisions. So, in terms of how management is making decisions through work councils and representation on company boards. And I think that's a big difference from, the way that we see our own sort of situation in our own country. So I think as much as it's great to hear these workers' voices here, but I think we cannot also undermine the importance and the significance of the unions and collectivization and kind of bringing these issues to the fore as, as of course, what we kind of, continue with the consumers' pressures or the public pressures, but I think that's an equally important part of it. And, some focus needs to be played on that as well. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Sandeep, finally, I'll ask you, in the last 8 years, what are the changes you have seen and what are the next steps that you would like to take as SII?
Sure. Thanks, Saroja. I want to just add a couple of bits to what have been said by the panelists very powerfully, actually. Sunil, I mean, you are an example, and chat shows there are comments about this, that if business looks at working conditions, it can do very well. 23% growth every year per year with your kind of ambitions. Other MSMEs can do too, right? So this point that safety is bad for business is misunderstood, and everybody needs to understand that. I have to clarify, 22% of accidents happen in ACMA members. So tier 1 is also part of this problem. And we all know that some businesses, not yours, Sunil, that's why you're here, but we know some businesses where some of their factories are fantastic, others are not. So, supply chains have got formed for a reason, and cheaper components are being made. And when they are being cheaper and cheaper, there's a race to the bottom, then there is compromise on either human rights and or environment. And that's what we need to dig ourselves out of from to be more scalable. I think this plausible deniability point, Mr. Srinivasan, is an excellent point. We have gone to the investors now. We have gone to the ESG consultants who are writing the reports of these brands, and we have raised the issue with them of doing better reporting themselves, because we are seeing that the tough questions are not being answered at all. They're being avoided or not being reported properly. And Haryana Human Rights Commission, Saroja, partially to your question, Haryana Human Rights Commissions filed a suo motu. We didn't know for 3 years. We had no role to play in it. But they filed a suo motu against Maruti Hero Honda based on our first report, Crush 2019. And that case is still going on, right? So we will see what comes out of it. We have now played our role as we have been invited. This point, Shri, that you make about the state versus the business, our theory of change is, and I believe it's strongly having come from business, 50 years of my life was in business, is business today is far stronger than politics, right? Just look at Trump and Musk, and we don't have to go very far. If business wants it, it'll be done. It'll be done by the government. So we think now the dog is, the tail is wagging the dog, right? So if the business wants, which means if the brands want, these are the one of the most powerful companies in the country. Yes, the same problem exists in textile sector, but they are much smaller players. And several others. These are the 10 most powerful players in the country in terms of brands, and they make 55,000 crores rupees profits every year, plus, right? So there is potential here to change not just the auto sector industry, but have an halo effect on rest of the industry. So rest of the manufacturing. So it's not an unsurmountable problem. So Saroja, back to your question. What we have seen until now, and we are thankful and grateful for a lot of this, 9 of the top 10 brands are talking to us sporadically, as I said, but there is some good action. Even when they don't talk to us, there is movement. Sunil is absolutely right. We have heard from many other people of many brands talking to the suppliers about it, some doing about it. The Japanese companies actually have been the best of the spectrum as of now. So Maruti Suzuki first, Honda next, and now thankfully Bajaj, an Indian company which is coming up and doing it much better than others. I would say the other Indian companies are not playing the game as well, but the progress has begun. Mahindra started talking to us this year. Ashok Leyland is yet to talk to us, but progress is going on. Similarly, and there are initiatives. Saroja showed a slide. If we look at our safety Niti report, we see a number of policy improvements. That has to be the start before implementation improves, right? Implementation is beginning now, but long way to go. We believe it's a generational game. Government working group set up by Central Ministry during Mr. Santosh Gangwar's time came up with the recommendations. Some of them progressed, others not. I talked about Haryana Human Rights Commission. BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards, approved a recommendation for a safety standard for power press. That has to be made into a law, so that will go on for some time, right? We have now a partnership with Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Through their Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, we'll be publishing a report on the compliance by the automobile top 50 listed companies with NGRBC, National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct, under which they have to submit BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. The quality of that submission and a tool to make that better is something we are working on along with Ministry of Corporate Affairs. That report will come out this year. Also coming year, we will have an entirely new initiative going on. It started this month. We will be publishing the comparison between 5 states, which are the main auto sector hubs. So Shriri, actually, there are only very few auto sector hubs. So if you crack those, it'll be 80% of the problem, right? So 5 states, Haryana, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Gujarat, right? You cover these, you've covered 80%. If Sunil can correct me actually if I'm going wrong in this, right? So in these 5 states, we shall be going to 200 workers each in the auto sector supply chain and publishing a safety index and an ESIC compliance and satisfaction index to compare states' best practices, opportunities, gaps. And we'll be publishing a report, which hopefully, like the ASER report of education, will become over a period of time a benchmark for which state is doing better, which hub is doing better, which brand is doing better, as advised by the workers. So it'll be a trend that will get established over a period of time, right? I can go on. We will keep publishing crushed reports every year. We'll keep publishing safety niti reports every year, every 6 months. So there is no way to hide. The data will be out there. And the fact is that government may not put it on paper, but they accept meetings and they accept a few actions. And the day they move, it'll be a big move. You're absolutely right. So we are hoping to move some of those things and we'll carry on with that journey. I'll stop here. Harpreet has her hand up.
No, thanks, Sandeep. I'll be very brief. I'm also just conscious of the time. I think what you said about, some of these Japanese companies taking, in some ways championing or, taking much more stronger actions, it may be an opportunity for us to reflect on, does the fact that Japan has now a national action plan on business and human rights, and they have their own Japanese guidelines on responsible business conduct that kind of prioritize, ethical and sustainable practices, human rights respect, environmental responsibility, fair business practices, ethical labor practices are all included in the Japanese responsible business guidelines, right? Which means any Japanese companies, wherever it is implementing, or wherever it has its supply chains and operations, they have to ensure human rights due diligence within their supply chains. Is that the reason? So I think something that you may want to kind of assess and look at that. And is that something that we can encourage the Indian government and sort of the Indian industry to kind of look at from that perspective? The second thing perhaps could be again sort of forward looking from here we are is, and maybe you're already doing this, but sometimes what happens is that the peers wants to hear from peers. In some ways, can we organize peer learning and exchange, where the Japanese companies could share their experiences, because it's not like it's like what drove them to take these actions and what were their own anxieties, how did they manage and overcome those anxieties and took actions that they took, and is it worth to kind of bring some of these companies who have taken an action with the others who have not, to kind of create a more more of a dialogue platform where they can learn from each other, but also just to kind of have that exchange going forward. So yeah, just wanted to kind of reflect on that very quickly.
We have one question that's come online from Rakhi Sehgal, and she says, since most of these supplier companies are MSMEs, has SII been working with local MSME industry associations, and maybe they can be persuaded to come together with the help of Ministry of MSME, set up a collective cluster level training center and pledge to only employ these registered and trained workers. So, Mr. Arora, I'll ask you, is there an initiative like this already in place? I mean, SII is one small, part of this whole thing, but the industry itself, what it's doing is likely more interesting for us.
To give you an honest answer, no, there's nothing happening. Uh, I know of so many small industry organizations. Uh, Safety is not on the priority of those organizations. So I'm being very candid, but that's the way they operate. They have
This is not just safety, it's also training of workers, employing certified workers, a movement towards something that formalizes, the kind of training operators that we need.
I am not aware, for example, companies like us who are OEM to Maruti, we have to have a dojo center in our company, and that has to be certified green. Maruti has to approve the training center, and only then workers are put into that dojo center for 1 week, and then they have classroom training, and we have registered teachers here, and then they teach, and then after 9 days or 10 days of training, do they go onto a machine? I am not aware of anything like this happening in the small scale sector, in at least in North India. Man, we are facing these problems because of a cultural and a legacy issue. So things like what Sandeep and Safe in India are doing are going to raise the level awareness, and it's going to happen slowly and steadily. When there is a sizable scale, when the small scale guy who's got enough money to buy good machines, and he has got the also of course got the pressure from the OEM not to use low quality machines, it's going to work hand in hand. I think in about 5 6 years you will see that Sandeep will, Safe in India is going to be recognized in the automotive sector much more than it is today. But it will change. It is, when I walk into the supply chain heads with large names that I won't take now, they ask me, who's Safe in India? Do you know Safe in India? I said, yes, I do. So people are very much aware. All the brands are very much aware of the safety, the work that you guys are doing. But we need to, kind of empower the people who are down there with, at 1 2 crore investment. They are not going to use the best presses. That's the problem.
Yeah. Mr. Raghavan, you wanted to add. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think, it is important to also really sort of, get the leadership to talk about this. And it's not just, and, talk about this in a public way, right? Uh, because a lot of these things, I mean, you have safety councils, we have safety awards, right? But we also have one of the worst industrial safety records in the world. I mean, it's not just in the automobile sector, which is what your report has been exploring. But you take any sector. I mean, mining, it's horrendously, this thing. The accident record is abysmal. Any kind of this thing, chemicals, textiles. Srihari mentioned. Wherever you go, we have a very, very poor this thing. But yet we have all these, high profile, I think, awards and discussions and these things. I think, somewhere a reality check must be provided. And I think that comes through, ultimately, I feel that the pressure has to come from the marketplace, which means that we have to sort of also look at educating customers on sort of paying some attention. The customers do pay attention to it, right? So they pay attention to issues like sustainability, fair trade. All these concepts have already been well entrenched with customers across the world, not just in developed markets, even in India. So, people pay attention to green products or pollution or whatever. So, what about safety? What can we do to build some awareness and therefore some pushback from customers uh, on this issue that something is not just sustainably produced, but also safely produced, that there is a value attached not just to the environment part of it, but also to the human cost, which is attached to that product. I think some work, if we can do that, so this this report, for instance, you have 6 editions out now. I think it needs to, can we look at sort of making these numbers, there's such stark numbers. I mean, how can we bring it more into the mainstream of discussion here, make it more aware with the ordinary consumers? I think this is something which maybe SI needs to also work on. How do we need that? Because unless there is more talk about this, particularly from you know people who have a bearing on the business outcome. So if it is there, whether it is with the government or regulators or with the customers, these are the only, and investors, these are the three big stakeholders who can influence business decisions. So how do we get the chatter level up in these three? This thing is something which you may want to look at in future.
Thank you, Mr. Arora. You said you needed to leave. Srihari, would you like to add something? And then we can maybe get Sandeep to round up.
I'll quickly round up
Yeah.
because I also need to attend a meeting.
Yeah.
So I agree with what Ravi is saying in terms of how do we communicate this to the larger public. I mean, part of my job is to do that, but it is questionable in terms of how much I've been successful in achieving that. But the point is that there has been some conversation around it, and that's why I came to know about this serious issue. The problem is we need to communicate it in a way that people are sort of aware of these issues that exist in the auto sector. I mean, almost everybody now owns a car or a bike or some automobile, and if they are aware of these issues, there is an additional pressure in terms of how businesses also react, and also how this gets reported to the larger public by media organizations, etc., and how widespread that reporting is. So I think that is also something that needs to be sort of explored. So that is my
I'll just
perspective.
add one thing here to both of you that, whenever we talk about this, almost the first reaction is, I don't want to know about these kind of things. And I think that resistance to this information is pretty high. And we need to break it together. I mean, in some way, we need to figure out how to get people to kind of look beyond the, horror and get into how can we solve this problem. So over to you, Sandeep.
Okay, I'll close the day with first gratitude and thanks to the panel, Harpreet, Mr. Srinivas, Srihari. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sunil, of course. Saroja, thank you for running the panel. I mean, all I have to say at the end is we believe it's a generational journey. I think, Mr. Srinivas, you said it right. All we can do is accelerate India's curve to this improvement. I don't see a step jump given our socioeconomics, but it also makes me think that it's not an unsurmountable problem. Solutions are in sight. We are working on those. Some of those things have started taking shape, and we believe it will make a difference. And what we have been able to do until now is we have put this issue on the map. 6 years back, people didn't realize how significant this issue is in the auto sector. People knew that something was happening, but happening to tens of thousands of people every year, lakhs of people, over a decade or more. At the families, you're talking a significant percentage of productivity lost to India, human loss of dignity to people and families. This is something I think we have put on the map. And like most places, whether it's the government or the brands or the suppliers, there are good people everywhere. So we are appealing to their conscience and saying, you need to do something about it. We are appealing to their morals and ethical sense, but also business sense, because, I mean, one of my favorite stories, and I'll probably end with this almost, is the Rana Plaza story in Bangladesh. You've all heard about it, read about it, probably more about it than I do. And I've met some of these Bangladeshi business people. Actually, Harpreet invited me a UN forum. I met some of them there. And what I know of this is the following, and I've read lots of papers about it, spoken to professors in Bangladesh and the UK and everywhere else. 2013, Bangladesh had a fire in a factory called Rana Plaza. 1,000 people died overnight in this fire, right? People went up in arms. Consumers went up in arms to the point of ethical consumerism that is being made here. People went up in arms. Brands had to defend themselves. Obama was the president. They actually came down on Bangladesh and the government had to do something. That burning, literally the burning platform created an action plan which resulted in stronger audits, stronger processes, training, all these things that we are demanding from brands and more, right? Enshrined in practices and law. The result of that over the last 11 years is the following, and it's evidenced. There were about 4,000 factories in Bangladesh at that time. Roughly 2,000 took on the game and they upgraded themselves, learned the stuff. 2,000 did not. Those who did not have got marginalized. So Sunil's point, they got marginalized. Now they're selling to Africa and low cost items, low value added items, barely surviving or disappearing. The top 2,000 have become world class. So much so that for example, when I met them at this UN forum in Nepal, I'm not kidding, their conversation with me was of a level of process of Six Sigma and certifications and stuff, which I cannot have probably with many tier one manufacturers in automobile brands. Forget tier twos. They have moved ahead. When they had COVID, they knew the processes to be tweaked and changed quickly, and they did it. We were just doing jugaad still. So what has happened to textile sector despite all this tightening up? Bangladesh has accelerated its growth post 2013. India, Vietnam, Indonesia, we have all tailed off. And they have the strictest laws. It's not that they are perfect, but we can get to that level. Yes. I mean, I spoke to this industrialist Anil Tandon. He's a textile industry manufacturer based in India and in Bangladesh. And we want to quote him in the report. And he sent me this. He argued a lot debated a lot with me, disagreed with lots of my stuff, but then he wrote this. And I'm quoting him. I have personally witnessed gradual but definite and tangible improvement in their Bangladesh processes, professionalism, efficiencies, and working conditions. Factory accidents are taken very seriously and factory audits are being made stronger even as we speak. Bangladesh has now become the leader in high quality jeans manufacturing and has taken business from Turkey and other countries. We can learn from their experience to harness the opportunity that India has from China plus one strategy of many buyers, especially the American ones. So, I think it's an opportunity both for dignity of our people, but also business. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be in touch and look forward to your support in taking this cause further.